Thank you, Chair, and thank you to this panel for coming together. I appreciate your good work. Let me start with cannabis, if I may, and then we'll move to ESD as well. First, Director Reid, thank you for your leadership. I know you've had a lot on your plate since you've taken on this role, but really pleased to see the progress that you've made, especially with the hiring numbers that you shared. Significant. I, too, will join the majority leader with my concern about the December queue. I know we're working hard to get to it, but we're still getting phone calls from people who have been waiting very, very patiently and who have a lot of money on the line, been trying to get through this process. So we want to see that continue, but I know that you're working on that. Let's start with the retail side, and then we'll move to the supply side. So on retail, I would agree again with the majority leader that some of the work that's been done through the regulatory side with proximity protections is encouraging. However, I know when you set this process up, a lot of it was modeled after the State Liquor Authority and ABC control laws. And I think that there's some more clarity that you see in terms of proximity protections for liquor stores, et cetera. And I think we could apply some of that clarity on the OCM side to cannabis retail dispensaries. I think there's some uncertainty that even though we've changed the distances, et cetera, recently, that there's still some wiggle room there that investors, that retailers don't feel secure in their spaces, whether in a more dense urban area like New York City or up in upstate New York cities like Rochester and Buffalo. So we'll be following up with your office on that. But have you heard anything more specifically from retailers since you've done these regulatory changes on proximity protections about their ability to kind of move forward in the process? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so last September, I believe it was, we put out the current regs under review for public comment. And pointedly, the brunt of that public comment was negative on the very concerns that you raise. One of the things that I'm particularly mindful of, and I know this from SLA, is that businesses need to know what to expect. And the thing that I am also conscious of is that unlike, the alcohol market, cannabis is an emerging market. The alcohol market's a mature one, we're an emerging market. So even though we have in our regulations the ability to consider things like public convenience and advantage, I think we have to be particularly sensitive to the fact that we are an emerging market, and the proposed regulations that we've put out there go a long way to try to strengthen that. That is giving local communities the ability to advocate and have a bit of process in that. It also gives a little bit of time for businesses to start operationalizing before there is a consideration of public convenience and advantage. So I think some of the measures that we've put in place are responding to the things that we've heard from sitting down with the field and with retailers and across the supply chain that could go a long way to sort of addressing some of the issues that exist.
Okay, well, we'll follow up with your team afterwards on some additional feedback that we've received, but I appreciate the work that's been started on proximity protections. I'm concerned on the supply side. This is a good problem to have. We're opening up more stores. There's more opportunities across the state. Congratulations on hitting that 1 billion mark. That's wonderful progress. But we're still hearing directly from farmers. We're hearing from processors that they're worried about not having enough supply to meet the New York demand. And obviously, some of the things that we can't factor in, at least right now, are the federal issues, right? And so if this really is going to be a New York-based market, how are we going to meet the supply demands? Are you opening or thinking about kind of changing regulations around growing the canopy, around lighting requirements, things that may allow processors and cultivators to increase their yield, if you will, so that we can supply our legal cannabis stores with New York-made products? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I think the one thing that sort of frames this is the issue that happened in the market in 2023, where we had allowed folks to go first in terms of growing cannabis, and then there ended up being no place for that cannabis to go.
Yes.
And that was incredibly difficult for our cultivator community and for communities across the state. So one of the things that I'm particularly sensitive, and we at the agency are sensitive to, is ensuring that if we have something starting at seed cutting or clone, it is getting someplace ultimately in the market. One of the things that I think is incredibly important is paying attention to balancing, like I said, across the supply chain. What I will say is in the last several months, we have put forward, the Cannabis Control Board has approved several cultivation licenses, but again, it being largely an outdoor crop, those plants aren't in the ground yet. So we'll see what happens this growing year, because it should be pretty interesting given the fact that last year was an incredible growing year. As someone who grows myself, it was a great year, but every year is different, particularly with the climate of New York, and so we want to see what happens on the cultivation side this upcoming year in terms of yield.
So let's continue to monitor that, but I think we should be open to, again, we want to make sure that we're not catching ourselves at the end of a growing season with too short of a supply
Right.
to meet the demand of our retailers. Can you speak briefly on where we are in implementing the recommendations that Commissioner Moy shared last year?
Sure. So it identified several areas. One was, of course, staffing, and we've worked incredibly hard to expand, hire up, but also keep our folks. I've sat down with every single team. I've gone to lab visits. I've sat down and watched them do input into licensing just to understand what it is they do, because I'm not the kind of person who sort of leads from a closed office. And that's been really important for staff, also having things like town halls. Another one of the areas that we addressed was the lack of internal accountability around audit and compliance. Again, I'm used to an agency with a very robust audit and compliance component, basically keeping the agency honest to what it says it does. So having put that in place has been incredibly important. Another thing is the communication piece. As you might tell, I'm a bit of a chatty person, and I like to sit down with our communities, sit down with the folks in the business and hear from them directly what's working. I don't like to work off assumptions and suppositions. I like to hear directly from folks. So we've gone and done, I believe, a 7 or 8 stop at this point, office hours tour across the state. We started in Geneva. We just had one on Long Island to really hear back from local communities about what's going on. But also thinking about the backlog we had in communication. I know several legislators had reached out over time and had not heard back. So we've been incredibly communicative in getting back to folks and following up, making sure that folks know that we're listening. That's incredibly important.
Well, I know Ty and Nicolette are here. They're doing a great job at trying to get through as many of those backlogs as possible. And I appreciate your roadshow coming to Rochester. That was a good conversation. So again, thank you for your leadership and your work, and I appreciate all that you're doing.